Mercedes-Benz C63 W204. You could easily say that this is the first ever Mercedes-Benz AMG designed from the ground up. This is also the first Mercedes C63 because the previous generation was called the C43. So you could probably say this is technically the first fully AMG Mercedes. Back in 2008, when the W204 C63 came out, it had a price tag of $78,000. That's of course USD. Meanwhile, in Canada, it had a price tag of $83,000. That just gives you a perspective how expensive cars are getting these days. The good news is that these are getting very affordable. But before you hit the internet, here's a few things that you need to know before you purchase a W204 C63.
Shaking.
From 2013 and 2015, Mercedes offered what's called the 507 edition, which from the name, it made 570 horsepower from the 6.2-liter V8 naturally aspirated, but with a few differences. The engine adopts the slightly lighter V8 from the SLS AMG, which included an upgraded ECU, new con rods, a lightweight crankshaft, and forged piston. And then there was the Edition 1, which had limited production model that featured special made paint and upgraded interior, 19-inch matte black multi-spoke wheels. And of course, the well-known Black Series, which was the most hardcore C63 W204. It featured a wide-body front and rear fenders, increased power to 510 brake horsepower, rear seats delete of course, increased and revised suspension setup, and it had the optional aerodynamic package. Now let's talk about some of the main issues. The good news is that there's not that many, but there is one that is very important, and of course it applies to the first batches of the C63 W204. It's mostly to do with the car's pre-facelift. So that is something you need to know because it's quite important. It has to do with the engine. The head bolts on this thing wear out pretty fast. We're talking about the pre-facelift models, which also led the engine to fail. So that's something you need to keep in mind because you could pick up one of these that looks really nice and clean with an head bolt engine issue and you're stranded with probably thousands and thousands of dollars in issue. There's also some mechanical issues related to the transmission that I read on some forums, but nothing major. What is important is that the pre-facelift models had the issues. After that, they fixed them, they changed them, especially because the 507 got the SLS AMG version of the engine, which of course was absolutely bulletproof. As you can see in this case, for example, this one has had almost no problem whatsoever. Great engine, solid, and great day-to-day car that will keep you on the road safe, and most importantly, it's not going to give you that many headaches. Of course, if you tune it, is a different case. Oh, and another thing I love about these engines, this thing over here, the bonnet, or as we call it in North America, the hood. This thing opens fully, as you can see, so it gives you access to work around the engine. One thing that I love about this model, the W204, is the interior, and specifically the facelift option. First of all, you got that suede finish on the steering wheel. I love the cluster, that digital and analog mix with separated tachometer, fuel as well, and then the center you got the speedometer with lots of information. There's a little screen in the center for the infotainment display, which will do the job just fine. But another thing that I love is all these buttons that you see here, easy to use, the climate unit, not too much of touchscreen, and this thing comes fully loaded with so many options, from power seats, heated seats, which is of course something that is very standard today, different driving modes, and one thing I absolutely love as well is built-in launch control, which for a rear-wheel drive car does very well. So check this out. The C63 W204 came out during a time when V8 was taking over. It was at the highest peak when this car came out. You had the BMW M3 at that time that was powered by a V8 naturally aspirated. You had the Audi RS4 B7 that used a 4.2 liter V8 making 414 horsepower. You had the Lexus ISF, which is technically the IS 500 that I owned, just a bit more power and all that. And that one used a 5 liter V8. You had the Cadillac CTS V, which also used a V8, but this was a supercharged V8. And of course, the Mercedes C63 W204 with the M156 engine, which was a 6.2 liter V8 naturally aspirated. But the difference that this at that time made 451 brake horsepower and 42 pound-feet of torque. Now, this wasn't the first time that Mercedes offered a V8. You also had the C43, which also used a V8, but a smaller displacement. This 6.2 liter V8 naturally aspirated with a 7-speed 7G-tronic. This has the MTC, which is the newer generation transmission, rear-wheel drive with a curb weight of 4,000 pounds. It could do 0 to 60 in 2008 in 3.9 seconds. In 2008, it made more horsepower than its competitors that offered a V8. And of course, you had the different generation, which offered more horsepower. There's no spinning. There's barely any spinning. There's no spinning. There is no spinning. I love this thing. Here's a few things you need to know as well. This generation C63 came in two body styles. So you had a coupe and a sedan for North America, of course. In Europe, I believe they offered an estate, or as we call it in North America, a station wagon. From 2008 to 2010, the model that ran was the P3 package. Then in 2011 to 2015, it came with 30 brake horsepower more, which made about 481 brake horsepower, and that one could do 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds. The one that we have for today's video is the P31 package. The P31 came with compound brake disc in the front axle, and rear there were yellow painted brake calipers as well. You had a carbon fiber lip spoiler on the boot, which this one does have for the saloon, and it had the AMG Performance steering, which is the one that we have today's video, with the Napa leather, and you had the grip area with Alcantara. There's also optional black designer leather. It had covered the upper section of the dashboard. Then you had the upper door trim and the armrest on the center console. On paper, this thing is an absolute animal. It outperforms each of its competitors in almost every category at the time when it came out. And even with modern cars, this thing has no issue. 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds for a rear-wheel drive car, it's not something you can laugh at. And if you find one with low kilometers, you'd have a higher performance as well, so that the ponies haven't left yet. And you can also tune these things to make quite a lot of horsepower, and if you get the facelift version, well, you're avoiding some of the problems that the first batch had. The sound of this car is one of the best naturally aspirated, and even stock, this thing sounded amazing. Now, this does have an exhaust, I believe, just to make it a bit more loud, but it hasn't lost that growling, that crisp, sharp noise that came out of the stock exhaust, in my opinion. And here's the thing, for a V8 naturally aspirated, it's not bad on gas. In fact, this week I'm driving a V8 supercharged 6.2 liter Hellcat, which is an absolute guzzler. This, if you drive it in comfort, you can get about 13 liters per 100 kilometers. I'm driving like a maniac right now because it's showing me about 15, 16 liters per 100 kilometers, which of course is expected from a 6.2 liters. Now, why is that 6.3 badge on the side? It has to do a bit with history because of the M1100 engine that kind of like this pays homage to that 6.3 liter back then, because Mercedes at some point had decided they didn't want to make the V8s anymore, and somehow there's a story behind it that the engineer was working behind closed doors that nobody was aware to make a V8 engine again, which of course ended up winning quite a lot of championships. Now, that is the history behind that 6.3, because the displacement technically on the V8, it is 6.2 liter, the displacement. One thing I love about this car is that even the transmission, after so long, especially this one with the MTC, it's an absolute glory. Look at this. You downshift, oh. The brakes are amazing. The big calipers in the front and of course the rear side really get this thing from 100 to 60 in no time. And you know what's the thing too? I'm driving the Hellcat and I'm always terrified that I'm gonna end up in a ditch with that car. Not with this. I love the sound of that exhaust. And even stock, I've always loved these. They handle so well and the traction is fantastic. The way it looks in some ways, this is a little bit better than the M3. I'm a big fan of that time M3s, the E90s and the E92s M3s, but this though just had something that the M3 didn't have. The sharp sound, the looks as well was very aggressive, more mature, and it's good that I have something that has very few kilometers and it's still in very good condition. The suspension is soft. It's a great car, even for day to day. I'm sure if you can't afford the gas, you wouldn't mind, especially now with the gas prices going down a bit. This thing, it will be a joy to drive daily. Yes, rear-wheel drive in Canada with snow is not a good mix, but you slap on some winter tires and you'll be fine most of the time. And if you live around downtown, well, snow is not always on the ground because they keep it nice and clean. So people that get terrified, oh my God, it's a rear-wheel drive. It's a lot of fun once the weather changes. I love this. And special thanks I want to say to Andre for allowing me to borrow his car and review it for today's video. He was kind enough to say, hey Sam, I'd love for you to do a video on this thing. And honestly, I was looking for one that I could use for my videos because I've always wanted to drive one that was not highly modified, but it was as clean as this in and out. And the owner, Andre, keeps this thing in absolutely mint condition. Doesn't have some spacers on the outside, hence why you look at the wheels are kind of like bulky and extended out just to give it a better stance, which I think it fixes a lot of problems with the look of this car, because the original ones were just like a little bit inside, it looked awkward, but the spacers fixed that problem easily. Now is the time to get one of these because they're gonna get very rare because either they have tuned the hell out of them, and what is important is that it's a V8 naturally aspirated. That is something that I don't believe Mercedes will ever get back. So try your best and get one of these bad boys now that you can. Find a clean one, daily drive it, take care of it. It's okay with kilometers as long as you take care of it. I love these, and I almost bought the coupe version of this when I bought the RS. The problem is that the one that I was looking at, it had high kilometers, and I realized I wanted a 4-door because they sold more of the coupe version than they did of the sedan. So these are very rare because of that as well. I love this. I really love this. It's just the way it drives, the way it handles. So good, so good. Nothing beats that sound from this car. Nothing.